All right, welcome everybody. I'm Mike Morello with CBSI, and I am honored to be here with the incredibly talented Scott Williams, who's set some time out for us to talk about some comics and chat for a little while about lots of stuff. Scott, how you doing?
Good, good. Thank you for having me. Hey.
Absolutely, my pleasure, and thanks for setting some time aside for us. We're really excited about this. I think maybe the best place for us to start is for those that are maybe unaware of your career. I can't imagine there are very many people that are, but if there are, I'd love to hear just a little bit about how you got into comics, how you broke into the industry, and some of the stories behind that. It'd be great.
Sure. No, I got into comics the same way most people do, just as a fan, but also happened to have an interest and to some extent a talent for drawing. And at some point, when I was like about 12 years old, I started thinking, I wonder if I could put those two things together. You know, probably the type of thought process that a lot of, kind of comic artists wannabes think about. I just kind of put my nose to the grindstone and really worked it through. It actually helped a little bit having familiarity with the art form, because I was a big comic book reader. You know, back then they didn't have comic stores, but I would be hitting the local 7-Eleven or grocery store or drugstore or whatnot, and doing the weekly buy.
The Hey Kids comics spinner racks.
Oh, Hey Kids comics, the spinner racks, the whole 9 yards. I was just totally into it. Joined a comic collectors club. Went from being a reader to like a bag and border. To keeping index cards of which comics I had, and what issues were, what do I needed to upgrade, and whatnot. And then about that time, kind of started copying some of my favorite artists, because I wasn't confident enough or comfortable enough to kind of draw my own stuff. But eventually started, drawing more and more. But again, everything with sort of an inkling, like, can I turn this into a career? Is that a possibility? And then in high school, I met a guy in one of my art classes named Will Spartasio, and I was a senior and he was a freshman, and he was, all of 14, 15 years old, and he could draw circles around me, and everybody else in the class. It was amazing. And that experience alone actually sort of, the light bulb kind of went off over my head. It's like, okay, I'm seeing someone else who's interested in the same thing. He's doing it at a high level, at a higher level than I can do. But I'm watching him do the work, and it's adjusting my sort of thought process, and my artistic levels grow. I think if you're around other artists, if you're a musician, other musicians, other athletes, if you're an athlete, you get around them and you start to pick up certain things. So that kind of accelerated my growth. So anyway, so our friendship sort of cemented, like, yeah, this is what I want to do. And I'm going to surround myself with other artists who have a like mind and have skill sets that are at my level or above, so that I can kind of basically be a parasite and leech off of them as much as possible, which I've kind of done to some extent my whole career.
I think we all do that a little bit, though. I mean, some of that is sort of homaging your influences, right? I mean, I'm a musician, obviously, and I do the same.
It's very normal. It's healthy. It is a way to learn.
Yeah.
No right or wrong way to go about doing any of this, or whatever it takes to get you to where you want to go. I don't see it as a crutch. I don't see it as anything other than you're taking in information, either artistic information, musical information, whatever. Just you're taking in inspiration sometimes.
Right. And you realize what you don't like, which is just as important.
Absolutely. I'm jumping ahead, but I can tell you when I did finally get work and started working for Marvel, they would send me all their comps, and which is complimentary copies of the entire Marvel line. And I got just as much out of seeing the entire Marvel line at the time it was being published. I got just as much out of looking at the stuff I didn't like as the stuff that I did. And I tried to pick apart, like, why don't I like this? Why doesn't this work for me? What is it about the way this guy draws that I don't like? So, you would think philosophically you would only be looking at the stuff that inspires you and makes you want to kind of go in that direction. But I learned a ton from the stuff that didn't work as a way to kind of put me in a direction towards where my ultimate goals.
Right.
But anyways, so back to how I got into this. Then went to college, got a degree in drawing and painting, which is not required. It's just the path that I took. But started putting portfolios together and showing them at San Diego Comic-Con every year, and making contacts with editors. Never really led very far. I kind of got some nibbles from DC and Dick Giordano at the time, but didn't go very far. And then a San Diego convention in 1984, I ran into my buddy Will Spertasio again. Back to that
full circle, yeah.
And he had actually just gotten hired to. His first job was as an inker, inking Art Adams on the new Long Shot series. And it was like, so he had his foot in the door, and it's like,
yeah.
Dude, is there any way? Do you need help? Can I clean your brushes? Can I shine your shoes? Can I make your chair more comfortable? Anything to kind of get me in the door? And he said, yeah, come move to San Diego, and I could use an assistant, and it'll speed up the process a little bit. So I did. So I moved to San Diego about 85, and kind of helped him do, but really kind of Mickey Mouse type stuff, filling in blacks, a little bit of background work, racing pages, inspire, encourage him to like make deadlines, anything I could do to kind of to be useful, while at the same time seeing like Art Adams pencils come in and see, oh, that's okay. That's what original art looks like in its pencil form. And I'm watching Will lay down lines. That's what inking looks like, and this was obviously way before, social media and YouTube tutorials and stuff. So
right.
I always say to see things live or to see demonstrations is pretty helpful. It really kind of helps you, kind of put you in the mindset. So
especially in the days where you're getting real art in front of you, rather than, not that there's anything wrong with the digital media, that's
not at all.
But very different to see the page come at you.
Yeah, absolutely.
In physical form.
So that's kind of what that's what got me in the door.
That's great. And you've done it for 30 plus years now. You've worked with some great artists. Other artists have worked with you as a great artist. So you clearly can pencil.
What's debatable, but okay, I'll take it.
What made you decide really to focus on the inks side of things?
Right. I think now there probably are a certain percentage of artists who would be interested in getting into comics as a career in order to ink, because they have seen the generation prior have either a success level or there's something about it intrinsically that they find interesting. My generation, I don't think anybody started inking comics because from the get-go as their main focus. I think we're to some extent artists and or pencilers, inkers, painters, whatever you would call, who simply got sidetracked, which is kind of what I did. I found that my drawing skills were okay, but the time requirements for me, as opposed to someone who's more gifted, who put in more time than me, sort of took away the option of being particularly productive, especially as a way to make a living, to produce enough work in order to pay the bills. I found that I was faster, more prolific as an inker, which generated higher income. But sure. I was also kind of interested and fascinated with kind of the concept behind inking, which is taking two artists, a penciler and an inker, and each excelling at one or the other, and then having those two parts be superior, those two parts together being superior to each individual component. So I like that idea. There was kind of a collaboration and a symbiotic kind of a relationship there that I thought was kind of fascinating. But I do think at the end of the day, and I think productivity and speed was always an issue for me from a penciling standpoint. And I actually and I hope this doesn't make me sound worse than it is, but I was never hugely compelled to tell stories in the way that the best storytellers are. All the best comics that we like, whether it's the Frank Millers or or the John Burns or the, Bill Sienkiewicz or who, I mean, pick your favorite artist. They're sort of born storytellers. And I was, I enjoyed sort of the process, the technical aspect of telling stories, but I could get off just as much by doing single individual images, which is kind of where it's led me now. I'm not really doing a whole lot of storytelling, interior work. It's all kind of cover issues, kind of trying to put everything on the line to do an individual image and put it all out there and hope that's good enough, because the drive to do that level of storytelling, I can do it, but it's hard and it's time consuming. And again, it's you got to kind of figure out, how to manage your time.
It's a different brain space, and
yeah.
and you get to do, and what you said before is great, because I think that symbiotic relationship between the penciler and the inker, and to a large degree the colorist as well, even the letterer, really, I mean, it provides that voice.
I've always kind of compared it to kind of music and bands and whatnot. I mean, I think you've got, songwriters, and then you've got the lead vocalist, and you've got the guitar player, and you've got the bass, and you've got drums, and and it's like each component is super important in and of themselves, but it kind of takes them all kind of joining together harmoniously to create that final sound, that final piece of work. And that's, to some extent, I kind of consider myself, I don't know, the bass player, the drummer in the band. You need that guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he's not. But it's not a solo act. It's
right.
You need to be that guy, and you need to be really good, and you need to be the guy that people want to play with and can count on. But I've never really sought the spotlight. I actually kind of shied away from it for years and years. Didn't do social media really up until just a couple of years ago, and then kind of realized from a professional standpoint, I should probably put myself out there a little bit more rather than, but I never, and I think that's another thing that a lot of artists tend to, not a lot of them, but many of them will tend to kind of gravitate towards, which is wanting to be kind of the lead vocalist or the lead guitarist. They want to be front and center. I was pretty happy, and still am pretty happy, to kind of be back in the shadows a little bit.
That's a great segue into a quote that I saw, that you said that you like to just let the inks flow and create mood, which I think this is exactly the conversation we're having, in that different inkers specifically can make the same penciler look completely different on the final page. So I'd like to kind of dive a little deeper into your actual process for inking and what you use. We'll get a little nerdy. I'd love to know about your process. When you get pencils put down in front of you, what is your process for inking in your brain space and on the page itself?
Right. I mean, and I think I'm obviously best known for inking Jim Lee at this point. But if you go, again, you mentioned a 30+ year career. If you go back and you look, I've inked dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of different artists. Some for extended periods of time, some for individual projects or covers, or a couple pages here and there. So I mean, I've run the gamut, and each artist that I team up with have got their own particular challenges. Sometimes it's based on how tight the pencils are. Sometimes it's based on, do I have an affinity for their art style? Most of the guys that I've worked with more extensively, I mean, the 3 guys that I probably worked on the most, just in terms of pure page numbers, is Jim, Wills Portasio, and Mark Silvestri. And Wilson, Mark in particular, that was more in the image days, but also leading up to that point, and a little bit since then as well. But those guys and I all sort of have similar interests in the types of artists that we admire, the types of artists that we want to become and want to be. The type of aesthetics, the type of storytelling, the type of drama and mood that you're trying to. So those guys are easier for me. And Jim in particular, at this point, having worked on this stuff for as long as I have, there's not really much he can do to sort of surprise me. He can surprise me with the quality and the consistency of quality. And his ability to decades later keep producing top level material. So I guess that's surprising. But in terms of having a question as to what it is I'm looking at and how to approach it, there's not really much of a problem, because frankly, if he gives me really tight pencils, I know from past experience what we're going for and what we should be trying to accomplish. If he gives me looser pencils, again, I've inked him so many times that I know how to fill in the blanks. I know how to take something that is a little looser and use past experience plus my own drawing skills to kind of fill in the blanks.
Right.
So that's a comfort level that I have with him in particular that I don't really have with anybody else. Anybody else, I really kind of need to go back and look at like their past works, see if they've inked themselves or if other people have inked them, which combinations work. How do I see the end result to its best advantage? What do I see? And so I kind of pick apart. In fact, so like when I inked about 10 years ago, when I started inking David Finch for the first time, when he came over to DC from Marvel, I had been looking at his stuff, but I hadn't been looking at it in an analytical way. So as soon as we got paired up to do a bunch of covers for DC, and then he and I teamed up to do a short Batman run on one of I think it was called The Dark Knight, whatever. It was a Batman book. So anyways, what I would do is I looked back to see who had inked him. He had inked himself up to that point. Danny Mickey had inked him a bunch. Matt Banning Bat had inked him. A bunch of guys had inked him. And I kind of tried to pick apart like what worked and what didn't work. And then apply my own style on top of it, kind of pick out the stuff that worked and pick out this type of stuff that I didn't think worked. And use that as a jumping off point. But yeah, so it really is about finding a comfort level and getting into the space. And then when you actually get the board, when you actually get the pencils in front of you, it's really about figuring out like what the most important aspects of what's in front of you. And you start getting into like kind of the nuts and bolts stuff, like, how is it lit? How much depth is there? Do I need to emphasize foreground, middle ground, background type of scenario? Keeping the lighting consistent. Are there textures that I want to be able to differentiate between rocks and boulders and trees and leaves and characters and details on their costumes and anything else that has that differentiates themselves as far as elements? Are there lines that I can use from my holster of weapons that I use when I'm inking people? There's certain things that I can pull from and use in that particular case. So those are all the kind of things that are kind of going through your head, and then you just buckle in and go for it.
What's the holster of weapons? Can you share your holster of weapons for?
And again, it is really nutsy and boltsy. It is like there are certain things that I know I can do with a brush. There are certain things that I know I can do with a pen. There are certain things that I know I can do with a marker. And it's all from trial and error. I know with a brush, I can cover a lot of ground very quickly. I can make these really kind of sweeping lines that work well with certain things like hair or certain type of rendering lines. Whereas I know with a pen, I'm going to get thinner, more brittle, more dead weight lines, as opposed to, so you start to learn all the different types of marks and lines and the ciphers that each individual tool uses. Again, I will go back to music. There are certain types of guitars that make a certain type of sound. And that if you're, doing Metallica or you're doing Led Zeppelin or you're doing Hendrix, you probably need to select the right guitar to make the sound you want.
Yeah, I'm not playing Metallica on that, for instance.
Yeah, so purposely trying to change things up, which is also totally valid and totally fine.
Yeah.
You don't have to, so I mean that's the beauty of art. You have the power and the choices to make something in a traditional way, or you can completely throw something against the wall and hope it sticks and maybe bring something new to the table. And that's what my style has been for years. I am constantly kind of re-evolving, partly out of boredom. I get sort of proficient doing one thing, And about the time that I started getting really proficient, when you would think like, okay, you found the magic to success, that's about the time where it's like, okay, now how can I change this up? What can I do to completely, completely reinvent or at least tweak things that had worked in order to challenge myself to discover something that I hadn't really thought about would work within the context of what I'm working on. So it's kind of a constant evolution, which is always risky. You're always running the risk of alienating. If you have a long-term fan base, the guys who followed my career back in the Marvel days versus the guys who followed my career in sort of the Image days versus followed my career at DC and Batman and Hush, and it's like, and then what I'm doing now with my pencils and how I ink myself, it's like they all look a little different. If you look at what I'm doing now versus what I did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it all continues to look different. You can tell that it's my work, but there are differences. And so and the guys who did follow your work back then, they may not necessarily be on board. So you're, with the change. So you're kind of hoping that wherever you do take your work, you can bring those guys with you and hopefully also develop new fans who are open to your style and to the things that you're trying to bring to the table now, as opposed to what you're trying to do 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Plus, you have to keep it interesting for yourself and play around a little
Absolutely.
bit and be inspired and creative. And so grabbing a new pen you've never touched before might be fun. It might be disastrous, but it could be fun.
And drawing and inking is always a bit of a high wire act. Anyways, the best of times. So but that's part of the fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And so do you have specific favorite actual pens that you use or inks that you use or anything like that?
And that's kind of changed. Some of it was changed because of the things that I just described about wanting to vary my repertoire and create new types of lines and new types of techniques and whatnot. And some of it was inspired because the mileage that I've got on my body, having done all this work over the decades, has kind of wrecked my back. So there are certain tools like crow quills and traditional dip pens and brushes. You really need to kind of be sitting like I am now, kind of very upright at a drafting table, kind of what you would expect. My back doesn't handle that as well anymore. I just turned 60 this year, so the mileage is the wear and tear is starting to show a little bit. Nothing I can do about it.
I'm feeling it too. Same thing.
Yeah, but I found a different way of working, a different sort of posture, and that lends itself to newer types of tools like markers, microns, and whatnot. I use quite a bit. Brush pens, which are usually tend to have either a felt or a nylon bristle tip, which the ink flows through rather than actually sitting upright and dipping the pen or the brush into a vat of ink. And those are the types of tools that I'm using now. And so those changes have come about, and I'm actually kind of digging sort of the different look that I'm getting, but it wasn't brought about at this time as a necessary response to wanting to change things up artistically. It was really more of I need to physically put myself in a different orientation in order to make this, to extend my career. There was a point probably 6-7 years ago, I was kind of this close to retiring from comics. My back was so shot. I couldn't figure out how am I going to sit at this desk for the next X number of years and keep doing this, because I was basically working in pain every day.
Right.
So I kind of reoriented myself and changed the tools. It was like problem fixed. I'm good. So I managed to somehow buy myself a few extra years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the stuff looks great. And we're going to get into a couple of those right now. As a matter of fact, you mentioned working with Jim back in '90. I think is when you hopped on the end.
Before that, I think we started doing some Punisher War Journal in the late '80s. So it'd be probably about '88, '89 at the latest. And then we did a short X-Men run, and then that kind of segued to a longer X-Men run. And then after that, we were pretty much off and running.
I have this guy behind me, the 268 behind me, which we're about to dive into that cover. I think you worked on Interior Inks the issue before that, if I did my my math
Well, we
right.
did a bunch. I mean, we did a 3-issue run. X-Men 256, 257, 258. All the 257. Joe Rubenstein guest inked because I was doing I had some other deadline. So anyway, so we did, but the 2 or 3 issue run there, and then just before that issue that you got up there, the 260, the 268. That was one of those. The previous issue, Marvel called us and said, we're late. We need an issue. Can you guys produce an issue in whatever 7-8 days? And it's like this. And this was when I shared studio space with Will Spertasio and Jim. And I said, and we were like stupidly going, sure, yeah, we can do that. Like, we'll do a whole issue from beginning to end. And
We don't say no.
like just over a week. Yeah, how can we say no to that? And we did it, and it actually it's cool. It's got a nice energy to it. It's not quite as refined or as slick as kind of what we eventually kind of came up with, but it got the job done. It's actually kind of a favorite of mine. Again, not necessarily because the work is so spectacular, but
proud of what you accomplished in 7 days.
There's pride, there's some pride of being able to do it as quickly as we did and not have it be like a complete disaster.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which counts for something.
Yeah, absolutely does, because it could have been there. There are plenty of comics out there that are disasters, and that's not one of them. So, okay, so I've skirted around it. Obviously, I'm pointing to this cover, the 268, and you have just released the pre-orders for the XFactor #1 artist exclusive, where you do the pencils, and a little bit of a role reversal, where you do the pencils, and David Finch does the inks for you, and I think Sabine Rich did the color, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And I've seen it, and it is awesome. I'm going to put it up on the screen real fast here so people can see what we're talking about. There is the trade dress, and it's gorgeous, and clearly an homage to the 268.
It does look familiar, doesn't it?
It does. Yep, absolutely. Even the skyline in the back, everything. It's fantastic. And then here's the Virgin version for everyone to check out too. And I think the total run on both together is 4,000 copies, if I'm not mistaken. My guess is that's probably broken up 3,000 and 1,000. I'm not sure about that, but I will this along the bottom so everyone can take a look at that if you're interested in checking that out. There's where you can go grab that at Comics Core Promotions /Scott-Williams exclusive, and you will see all of your opportunities to buy those there. I can pop that back up on the screen later as well. But please talk about this process. Talk about the idea. This is a great concept. And how did it come about that you would sort of switch roles on this cover and do it the way you did it?
The role reversal from a technical standpoint, me drawing it and Dave Finch inking it, to some extent, it started a couple of years prior. I had I penciled a Batman and Catwoman piece. I've actually let's see. I think I've actually got it. People can see this. This was this was a piece. This was a piece that I penciled and Jim inked, and I thought it was a lot of fun to kind of do that full role reversal angle, because I think you do tend to get sort of pigeonholed at a point in your career if you've been doing mostly inking, which is 95% or more of what I have done. But I have penciled interiors. I have penciled covers throughout my career, but in very small numbers. So I can't deny the fact that I'm thought of as primarily an inker, and obviously Jim. Everybody knows what Jim does. So I thought it was kind of a cool idea. Can I talk him into inking me just as an experience? And I think the fans would kind of think it's interesting, since inking is kind of it's a nebulous job description that I'm not sure people on the outside looking in have a full understanding of kind of what you bring to the table.
I agree. I don't think they do. Absolutely. There's an artistic level that the art gets brought to that I think a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, most people don't understand how the sausage is made, so it's a good good excuse and a good example of kind of seeing what can be done. And it kind of got me thinking about when I started doing all these covers that I've been doing for the last year and a half, 2 years. At some point, would I be willing to give up the inking process to other artists as kind of an experiment, as part of just kind of an entertaining thing for fans to see who may not be expecting it? My biggest fear was I literally going to be okay with relinquishing my OCD-ness, my need to control the final image. It was a bit of a mental hurdle to get over. Like, give this up even to someone really good and really talented, whether it's Jim or Dave Finch or anybody else. But I thought the experiment was worth it, was warranted, and when this cover became a possibility, I thought, okay, this is going to be the one that I'm going to try a lot of different ways to kind of get people's attention on this book. And so part of it was doing an image, homaging an image, frankly, that I'm a part of, the X-Men 268 that you see there, that I did with Jim. So I'm homaging Jim, but I'm also homaging myself,
right,
as one of the original artists for that book. But then also changing it in that the main kind of compositional layout and vibe of the original X-Men 268 cover was a three character composition. And how can I turn that into like a more of a team 5 character type of a book? So how can I kind of create that same vibe, but also add some characters without it seeming kind of cluttered or claustrophobic, or just kind of managing the composition to kind of incorporate. That was the next task. And then thirdly was then to figure out if this was the one to get somebody to come in. And I wanted someone who I felt was going to be an appropriate artist stylistically, but also could add some of their own aesthetics, who are comfortable enough in their own skin, confident enough in their own artistic voice that they would add certain things that were unique to them. And most inkers do that anyways, but I know that people can sometimes be intimidated, especially if they're working with somebody for the very first time. They want to be very precisely faithful to what the penciler puts down. I felt like maybe being a penciler and having inked a bunch of his own work in the past already, might be a little more confident and be willing to sort of subjugate his own style in certain parts, then also to add his own flair and his own aesthetic sensibilities in other parts. And he did that exactly. He did it perfectly. So most artists are pretty particular about, especially with characters, or the face, for example. You go over years, you try to kind of hone down what your type is and what's on model, and he nailed it. Whether it was Scott Summers Cyclops, or Jean Grey, or the Beast, or whatever, any of those characters, I penciled it pretty tight, and he followed my model almost exactly. But then once you start getting into some of the light logic, which is one of the things that he's really good at, he really kind of helped round the forms. He added a bunch of textures. I had like very minimal fur indications on the hairy beast, right? And he added like all the stubble, and it created, a rounded form. It created a light logic. It created texture. It created detail. It created sort of a focal point of interest that wasn't in my pencils, and frankly wasn't even on my mind. And he did that. And he did that himself. There's a bunch of stuff he did on the backgrounds. I just had them standing, much like the original cover, standing on some kind of cracked steps, leading to wherever. And he like went in there and lit them and rendered it with like hatching. Again, none of that was in the pencils. I didn't ask him to do it. But he in the process, he asked me, I've got some ideas about some of the backgrounds, some of the textures. Is that okay? I go, yeah, knock yourself out. Do whatever you want. I think with the buildings, my buildings were a little more elaborate than shoeboxes standing on end, but they were simple. And then went in and like he added elements of his own type of architecture, and he even like sort of kind of fixed my perspective grids, because I was just kind of eyeballing it, and it was just the type of thing that I would fix if I'm an inker, and I get these types of pencils, whether it's from Jim or from other artists all the time, where the linear perspective is off a little bit, and I'll fix it. And it's not that big a deal. I know how to draw linear perspective, and there's sort of an expectation, like as long as it's not way off, I'll fix it. Well, I kind of same vibe about Dave. If something's a little off, he'll fix it because he's a really good artist. So
Yeah.
there's always it's a big thing about penciling and pencil inker teams is there's a certain sense of trust you're going to need to have, and I trusted him, and he came through with flying colors.
Yeah, he absolutely did. It's funny too. I just met him recently. I met him in Memphis this past year, right before we stopped having cons, and his commission list was full, and so I asked him just to do a remark for me. And you should see, I don't have it with me, but you should see this remark that he did for me. I mean, there's so much detail, and it was a Wonder Woman remark. And I said, man, that's one hell of a remark, man. I think everyone's going to want a remark now. He says, I just can't I have to represent myself in everything that I do. So he penciled it, he inked it. I mean, this thing probably should have cost me a fortune, but it didn't. But it was just that, it was that mentality. First of all, he's a very nice guy. So that helps. I'm sure that makes him easy to work with. But at the same time, he also, while I watched him do it, he just loves every line he puts down on the page. Whether it was the pencil side or the ink side, everything was very deliberate, and he had the smile on his face the whole time he did it. It was just a stupid little remark for a guy he'd never met, and that just told me about the mentality of him, and I'm assuming that it's part of the reason why you chose him to work with, just because he's got that mentality. And I think it shows in this cover. It shows in all of his work. It shows in yours as well. And this cover, I think, is a great confluence of those two things. It's clearly both of you, and that's great. It's also an awesome cover. It's a great homage as well. So I'm really excited to see that cover. And I can't wait to get my grubby little hands on one. And so I'm gonna put the banner back up for everybody so they can check out where to go grab that. Is there any other way for anyone to grab it other than here at the comic store?
No, it's exclusive. It's exclusive. It's obviously a pre-order at this point.
Right.
We're all in the time of COVID-19, so we're all hoping that printers and distributors and whatnot come online sooner than later. I'm hopeful. But what this does is it reserves your copy. With it being as limited as it is, it's a way to know that once the comics are being produced again and going out to distributors, this will be your ticket to as a guaranteed buyer for the cover before it sells out.
Great. Well, I've already put my pre-order in, so I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, I have one of your other recent ones up here, this Wolverine, which actually was the next thing I wanted to chat about, which is an unbelievable piece. It's sort of a first, I think, for Marvel anyway, where they've released a sketch cover that is inked, and it was a joint venture.
I actually did not know that was the case, and it surprises me. I think sketch covers have been done in the past. I guess Marvel in particular DC in particular has done it. This was news to me that it was a first for Marvel, but I've heard it multiple times that there aren't a whole lot of black and white sketch covers like this one. And I think the other big difference with this one is that the art that is printed on that sketch cover is shot directly from the original art, so that you get to see the pencil sketch lines underneath with the ink on top, which is, if you're kind of an art fan, or especially an original art fan or collector, it's kind of what you like to see. You like to see kind of the creative process on the board. You like to see where the inks differentiate themselves from the pencils, where artistic license is made. Just kind of a little bit of a visual insight on kind of the creative process. So I think from that standpoint, it was a kind of a first for Marvel in particular, where you could actually see the pencils and the inks in pure black and white. And look, I mean, again, kind of having been doing a lot more covers over the last few years, I'm very sensitive to the fact that really good color can make your artwork look so much better than it really is. I'm constantly looking at what colorists are doing and what works and what doesn't work. So I value and am so grateful when I get great colored jobs like what Sabine Rich did on my XFactor #1 cover. And the same thing with the Wolverine cover that we're talking about. John Roush, who did the coloring on that, did a great job. But it's also kind of neat to see it in black and white, because that's kind of my world. I mean, everything that I do is black and white, and a really high fidelity quality black and white piece of art speaks to me. And it doesn't necessarily, some people think that's, a piece of comic art isn't finished until it's colored, which is fair. If that's what you've kind of grown up with, seeing something in stark black and white probably seems unfinished and jarring to you. But I think if you're, of a different mindset, and especially if you kind of like, seeing original art, or an art collector, whether it's printed pages or sketches, I think there's a real quality and a value to seeing black and white artwork. It has a presence of its own and a quality of its own. I kind of appreciate that, and so I'm hoping that the people who enjoy that sketch cover, appreciate it for the same reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. It shows the process, and I love the process. So to see now, I have the whole set, so I have the color one too. So I guess, right. I mean, best of both worlds there. But it's a beautiful cover in both senses. But it definitely has a different voice with the colors than it does in the black and white, like you say. And you have, and your career spans an interesting time frame where you saw the changeover in color from the mid '80s into the '90s, where coloring really changed pretty drastically. So you've gotten to taste both.
Our studio, Homage Studios, and then eventually Wildstorm, we really kind of pioneered a lot of the computer coloring that came about. And the guy that I work with a lot with Jim, Alex Sinclair, he, along with the Homage Studios and Wildstorm, really kind of pioneered a lot of the techniques that now is pretty commonplace. I mean, whether it's Marvel, DC, Independence, Image, whatever. Everybody is kind of using a lot of the technical benchmarks that we used and we pioneered with the Wildstorm stuff. So yeah, it's been and frankly, back in the early Marvel days, when you didn't have that computer coloring, we always kind of wished, God, I wish we could do more with color. I wish we weren't sort of at the mercy of much simpler and less strategic use of coloring. And so you're right, I did kind of get a kind of a front row seat to seeing how the new coloring is emerged, and it's not always successful. I see some god awful, over colored, over rendered, over saturated, overworked color, but when it does work, it's like it's magical.
It is definitely, absolutely is. I'm going to put the black and white up on the screen real fast, so our faces are going to get hidden for just a sec. But so this is the Wolverine cover that we're talking about. This was the Wolverine #1, which was released about a month ago, if I'm not mistaken. And I'll put the banner back up again so everyone can see where to go grab that if they want to at IG Comic Store. It's a shared exclusive through CBSI and IG Comic Store for this particular cover, and extremely limited. So I'm not sure if there are copies left. Last I checked, there were, but I'm not sure at the moment. So let's go back to the banners here, and here's where you can go grab that. So please do yourself a favor and grab any one of them, either the black and white, the inked sketch, or the color. There's a trade dress and a virgin as well. So correct. There's that. And so being the nerd that I am, I was reading your Instagram, and I saw that there's a section where you say, who would you like me to work with in the future? Who would you like to see ink my stuff in the future? I'd love to do this kind of project again, getting back to the XFactor thing. But who would you like to work with in the future? If you could choose people maybe you haven't worked with, or people that you have and you'd like to work with again, who
Yeah,
would you like to see
yeah.
ink your pencils?
I do think my thought process, and I think it's still early to kind of pigeonhole, how I would want to see this thing going forward. But I think my initial mindset was people have been interested in seeing. I think for the most part, a pairing of artists who have worked before, but to see it flip. So Jim was obviously an obvious first choice, and maybe somewhere down the line, the one that we did, the Batman Catwoman piece that we did was just kind of for fun, but maybe somewhere down the line, maybe I can talk doing a cover for print. Dave Finch's inks on the XFactor, that was the first one that was kind of official and for print. But so moving forward, it'd be great to work with people that fans kind of have an idea of what I brought to the table to their pencils. So how would that look if it got flipped? So guys like I mentioned earlier on in the hour, Wills Portasio and Mark Silvestri, Jeff Scott Campbell, the guys who I have some kind of a past with in one role. Let's see what it looks like flipped. But then there would obviously be like some really interesting kind of off the rails type of pairings, which I would be all for. I mean, could I convince Bill Sienkiewicz to ink some of my pencils? Could I convince Kevin Olin? Could I convince there's a million guys out there, Andy or Adam Kubert, and some of these guys that I'm talking about, some of them I've already talked to about this as a possibility, and they said yes.
Oh,
nothing. I will say nothing planned specifically at this moment, but I've got my foot in the door. I have confirmation that it's not a dead deal, that when the opportunity and the right thing comes along, that I can make this happen. So I'm going to be just as curious as you are to kind of see where it might lead. And again, I don't think the goal is necessarily to I don't think success necessarily means creating a masterpiece. If I can do that in this scenario, so much the better. I think it's just kind of interesting because I do think the penciler inker roles are a little nebulous, a little fuzzy for a lot of fans, and I think this is a way for them to kind of see what each individual component brings to the table. And so I'm kind of I'm gung ho to kind of explore that a little bit.
I know fans are really looking forward to the work that's coming out. This XFactor obviously is huge, and we can't wait to get our grubby hands on that. I have mine pre-ordered already. But can you tell us about any other future things that are coming? Can you spill the beans on anything for us that we might be seeing in the future?
There's something there's some things I can say. There's some things I can't say. I know that this week Jay is going to announce the next phase of the auction series of images that he's doing. If anybody hasn't been following him on Instagram, you're foolish, because the stuff he's doing is great. Where he's doing an image per day, and the stuff is he just hits one out of the ballpark, one after another. I'm going to be doing one of the guest spots. It announces on Wednesday. I will be doing a commission that will be auctioned on Instagram. Money is going to go towards comic stores who are obviously, there's no cash flow at this point because of the coronavirus. Stores are shut down, so this is kind of helping them, get from here to when everything's can open up again. I'm going to be doing a piece for an auction. I don't know yet what the character is going to be or what I'll be doing. I think Jim is going to offer suggestions or put suggestions on the table for anybody to make. So
Cool.
it could be a Batman, it could be could be George Jetson, it could be it could be just about anything. So I'd be curious to see where this goes. But I'm honored to be part of it. I think he's had Art Adams do a piece. He's had Brian Hitch. He's had got a bunch of different guest artists. So I'm pretty honored to be part of this. And it's nice to give back to the comic stores, which my career, I wouldn't have a career if there wasn't somebody out there selling the comics that I work on. So it's a nice opportunity for me to give something back.
That's really cool. I can't wait to see more on that. And for those that want to check that out more on Instagram, you can check out Jim Lee's page at Jim Lee, and then of course at Scott Williams Inks as well. Any other projects hitting the shelves now or soon that we should be aware of?
Got some things coming up. I'm doing some things with Jim, and things I can't talk about right now, but yeah, we're keeping.
And there's the Our Fighting Forces, which also you had a hand in, which should be hitting your Walmarts as well.
That. You're right. Yeah, there was the Our Fighting Forces, which is a Walmart special, available at Walmarts now, and I think DC has just put it online on their DC portal, which will be available. So that would be another avenue to, and it's a great story. It's Jim Lee doing Batman. That pretty much sells itself right there. But it's based on a true story. It's something that we're proud of being a part of, and it's nice. It's nice to have something out right now. I mean, comics have kind of dried up as far as new issues, so it's kind of, and this was done obviously before any of the teen stuff had kicked in. It's kind of nice to have a new project that even if it's just a short story, to have something out there, and something that I think people would enjoy. So I'm kind of hoping people will check it out.
Yeah, and it is out. I have actually found my copy. So if you are willing to brave Walmart and COVID, it's the first aisle. So you can just go right in, grab it, get right in the self-checkout, head right out without a whole lot of danger.
Yep.
And get your hands on a copy if you want the real deal in your hands. Otherwise, if you're being cautious, then stay at home and check out DC's streaming comics. And I think you can get it for 99 cents, I think, online. So nice and cheap that way to experience it and check that out. That's really cool too. So I think that about covers the questions for the day. Unless you have something else that you'd like to talk about, I want to just remind everyone to go head to Instagram at Scott Williams Inks. More on David Finch, you can check that out at dfinchartist. More on Sabine Rich is at Sabine_Rich. And then, of course, at Jim Lee to check out the Jim Lee daily sketches for charity. Maybe put your 2 cents in on what character you want Scott to ink for him. And then
Please.
We'll run forward with that. And then, of course, for the 2 exclusives, you want the XFactor #1. Do your pre-order now for either the Virgin or the trade dress or the set. And you can do that at comicscorepromotions.com. /Scott Williams -exclusive, and then you can grab the Wolverine. If you like the Wolverine, you can still grab that from CBSI, which is comicbookinvest.com or IG Comics Store, and they still have some of them available. I'm not sure if the black and whites are, but I think last I checked there were still some available. You can grab one of those too. It's a beautiful piece. There's a 3 issue set for that. There's the black and white inked sketch. There's a trade dress and a Virgin of that as well. So check all that stuff out. Plenty of goodness. Head to your Walmart, grab an Our Fighting Forces, and I think that covers all the juice. Scott, it's been really great talking to you. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Hopefully we'll get through all this COVID stuff, and you and I can meet in person and catch back up someday down the road. That would be great. So So thanks again. I really
Thank you for
appreciate it.
having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Be safe. Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody. Stay safe.